I'm Adelaide Bannerman, Associate Curator at Invisible Dust. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this afternoon's session and in conversation, nature relationships in urban environments. I'm joined today with Frances Disley, artist, and with Michael Smythe. I'll give you a short introduction to both, and then we'll follow on with a film that Frances made earlier on this year. So let's start with intros. Frances Disley is an artist that we worked with on a project we delivered a few months ago called Unnatural History, which is an exhibition featuring artists and their engagement with the natural world. Frances was one of 4 artists that we commissioned for the show. And she's made a few sculptures and some films. She's a love letter to her local park, which is what we'll be showing later on. Michael Smythe, who joins us, features in that film as well, and was interviewed by her. And Michael Smythe is an urban farmer creative director of Nomad Projects, which is an arts foundation that develops experimental projects across digital and location-specific spaces. Nomad Projects critically engages with issues surrounding environmental and social justice within the urban landscape. And he's also co-founder of the Phytology Cultural Institute on the Bethnal Green Nature Reserve. So as I fluffed earlier on, Frances was one of 4 artists that we presented in the show on natural history. And we're going to go straight to her film and watch that, and then start the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
It's a beautiful thing that so much of our cultures, you know, not just Indigenous culture as well, native cultures, culture from the UK, so much of our culture is based around the plants that grow around us. So many of our stories and spiritual connection to spirituality and all these different things. I must admit that as my training has always been in science, I was always really rubbish at botanical identification and actually noticing the plants when you're outside. And even now, it's not a skill that I have, really. It's only something that I've started to learn. And there's all sorts growing and that will grow that throughout the year: red clover, rose hips, nettles, cleavers, dandelions, so many things, violet, yarrow, just countless plants. It's been awe-inspiring and grounding for me to be able to integrate the knowledge in my head and actually see it in nature around me. It's given me a new sense of wonder when I go for walks, and it's been really good for me mentally and emotionally, because I think curiosity and awe are 2 human emotions or states that are really, really necessary for us to be well and balanced and grateful for life. And when you step outside and you can look at these plants and actually recognise what they are, and not just see it as this little weed, like, for example, plantain, you know, this little thing that you step on between pavements, when you realise that, oh, actually that can boost your white blood cells or work on your lymphatic system, and these are the chemicals that are within it, and these are the clinical trials that have been done on it, and you look at this wondrous little being that stayed so humble and quiet, not bothered if it was noticed, and it holds so much magic, and magic that we can understand for a narrative of science now. It's amazing.
And cities are a relatively new habitat for the human race when we think about sort of our journey as a species. And they're not always built so well, and they're not always taking the interests of all of us at heart, to create healthy, biodiverse systems that we can thrive in. And it all starts with the medicine plants that grow up in the cracks of the city, and being able to look at these tiny little sort of tenacious plants that have an incredible link to our kind of cultural heritage as a species, but also to other mammals and birds that use these plants for medicine.
Propolis is a substance that honeybees make to seal tiny gaps inside their nest or hive, which are usually less than 4 millimeters. The bees use it also to clean the cells and clean the hive, because it's an antifungal an antibacterial substance that they use.
Wow, sort of food and medicine practice it's ancient, and it's taken lots of animals and people to kind of work out how to use this stuff, and we can't lose it. It can't be lost to the pharmaceutical companies or to the councils that are sort of naively using pesticides to kill off biodiverse sort of useful. So I mean, it's kind of important to keep those kind of cultural links that are quite ancient and old as well, and see the city as a place that can hold that, because herbal medicine is the medicine for the people. It's very simple in that way.
Where we place all our trust has shifted from priests to scientists. In essence, science lives to disprove itself. The things that we know in science, we are constantly testing again until we can disprove it. And when we can't disprove it, then it's a fact. Yet we revere everything that is said as the truth. And we've made science the foundations of everything because we are so enamored with logical thinking, when really science is just a perspective. It's one narrative of a strange and glorious world. And we live in a world where we glorify logic, but what we forget is that logic is a tool. It has its limits. Logic does not apply to everything. If you rely just on logic for everything, you're not going to get the best out of every single situation. And the human mind has so many more abilities than just logic. Logic keeps us safe. It makes us feel safe, but dare to feel.
The thing I love most about herbal medicine, though, is just that long-term investment. Obviously, it's about identification and understanding your relationship to it, but it's also about integrating it into your life. And say if you've got a migraine, integrating a bit of feverfew on a daily basis, letting it integrate into your body over time, and having a longer lasting effect, as opposed to the kind of big pharma model of just pop a tablet and off you go.
Plants, if we look at the forest as not just a series of single entities and different species that live together, but as one entity, right? Because it's an ecosystem and everything communicates with each other. All the different species are connected through fungi, which wrap around the roots. So trees can send messages to each other. Oh, predators come in, you need to release these chemicals to make sure that it doesn't come near you. Or if a tree gets cut, other trees will feed the stump nutrients in the hope that it will grow back. And all these beautiful different things that make up this ecosystem. And they do this because they will need each other to maintain temperature and humidity and living conditions. Without each other, they cannot thrive. Interestingly, with monocrop culture, where we just clear the land, plant one plant, grow loads of it, sell it and make money, that extractive, single-minded culture, the trees and plants lose their ability to communicate with each other, and so they lose their ability to fight off. They basically lose their immunity as well. So we need pesticides to come in and cover the plants, which then affects us and our nervous systems, but also the land around it. And it's just fascinating to me. There's certain rules in nature which are just absolute. There are seasons and cycles, and diversity is needed. And that is why it's dangerous if you apply that logic or philosophy even to the world and people's minds and the human disciplines, relying on science alone means that we are going to miss out on a lot and possibly harm ourselves, It's not to say I'm anti-scientific. I love science too much. I just don't like when something cannot be assessed, analysed and criticised objectively.
Do you think there's anything we could learn from bees in terms of community?
Honeybees and bumblebees as well, but looking at honeybees, they work as one unit. So they're kind of in it for everybody else, and they are working towards not their future, but kind of the future of the next generation. Because if the queen, if she lays maybe nearly 200,000 eggs a year, those worker bees are going to be working to keep that hive safe, full of food and protected for the future sisters that they're never going to meet, because they only have worker bee short lives in summer, 6 weeks. So they're just thinking about the next year, the next generation of bees. And so they're looking after that community and looking after each other. They're not there to kind of outdo each other, because they're all in it together. Like the trees are all in there as that community to make sure that they're future-proofing themselves.
I often think of, like, in terms of the custodianship of the land, succession is important. Then as an indicator of forest floor health or meadow culture health, the more diverse our communities are, the richer we are. And particularly in the plant world, that sort of sharing support structures.
You feel like an intermediary between people and bees, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because maybe there's things that you're helping them out with that they wouldn't need help with if you weren't in an urban environment. Or
it's an interesting question, because how far do I get involved in the bees? Do I kind of feed them, overfeed them, or do I overtreat them so they become reliant? Well, not kind of reliant really, but they're not grooming themselves as well to get rid of pests or get rid of disease. Do you let them try and build up a resistance? Yeah, it's how you kind of intervene. Because I can't change what they're going to do. I don't know what they're thinking. I can't. I'm just kind of there really as, you don't own the bees. You're a beekeeper. That's kind of, so they are wild, and if they swarm, they're not my bees. I can't kind of say to another beekeeper who's going to collect them, get off, they're my bees, because they don't belong to anyone. So as a beekeeper, you are, just kind of hosting them really in your hives.
I've become really aware of the plants that are dead local to me. So like the things that are grown in the flagstones, streets over from me in this park, that I've become obsessed with the mystery. And I've started slowing down and really noticing particular plant, because your sense of the local might have shifted, like that. Definitely. And that value of local resource. I love the idea that you could form a relationship with local plants and use them for different things and appreciate them for different things, and that, like, even noticing the birds, a thing that's psychologically beneficial. I've got 2 little boys, and I've been using a healing balm with their cuts and scrapes and things, and they come and collect the plants with me.
I think what you're doing with your boys is brilliant in terms of getting them to see the local park as an apothecary, as a play space, as a place to test out stuff, foraging what is seasonal in your local park, and teaching your boys a value thing of, like, this land is important. If you don't know what something is, you tend to not love it, and if you don't love it, protect it. And I think as a species, we really got to step up our advocacy and protection of the planet. And it starts with the little cracks in the pavement and caring. It's the act of, like, civil care right through to personal. It's all linked.
Plant a seed and watch it grow. The reason being is that herbal medicines is more than just finding a certain plant that will work on a certain organ. It's about connection to nature and connection to yourself. And planting a seed and nurturing that seed and connecting with forces of life in this way is a really beautiful way to sink into this whole philosophy. Herbalism is part of a holistic well-being, holistic view of life. So be holistic in your practice. Read the book, go to the forest, look at the nature, smell the flowers, plant the seed. That, I think, is one of the most gorgeous ways that you can connect with herbal medicines. Go to a herbalist talk, listen to them talk. They talk about plants in a completely different way to scientists well, not in a completely different way. They often use science as well, as many herbalists are very scientific. But because the way of treating the body is different in herbalism than it is to Western science, you'll get a new understanding of the body, and it's really wise and it makes things work. So, for example, something might be wrong with your liver and a doctor will give you a pill that will work on a certain part of the liver. Whereas a herbalist will work on not only the liver, but also the gallbladder, because the gallbladder creates the bile, which supports the liver. And also, if you want to detoxify, focus on the blood circulation as well. And so you start to sort of zoom out and see the body holistically. And then you can understand which plants use for which action, you know. And hearing a herbalist talk is a really grounding and beautiful way to understand herbalism.
Hi, welcome back. There were a lot of salient points, I think, in the video. I've been collecting some of those points, which I'd like to kind of repeat. I don't necessarily have a question, but I think the lines to quote back might kind of help to drive the discussion. So first of all, there's things like identification of plants, understanding how to use them in the urban landscape. Herbal medicine being the medicine for the people. Thinking about what Andrea Koo remarked about the bees and how they were future-proofing the next generation. You know, what can we learn from that as communities? Certainly during the pandemic, and I think a lot of people this will resonate with a lot of people about the sense of how the sense of the local has shifted. Active civil care and personal care, connection to nature and self, and being holistic in practice. I was just wondering, I'm not quite sure who to direct it to, but either of you can respond, you know, what those all kind of mean to you and how do you integrate those things in your practices?
Yeah, I kind of want to mention as well, to put into context that whole thing was made in lockdown as well. Like we had our conversations in lockdown. It kind of came out of just a shift in my perception of local, like super local, within, you know, half a mile radius of my house. You know, green spaces. So lots of things you were mentioning there will have been really like, oh yeah, present. It's a definite set of circumstances, I think, that led to the work and the interviews that were taking place, because we were stuck having these conversations online, like, you know, and I had a set of questions, but that, yeah, that video and the conversations will be useful in any set of circumstances, but they were definitely born out of a particular situation. And I think we even talked in February as well, which is even seasonally quite a hard time. So you're always thinking about mental health and the psychological benefits of, or like that desire, that reawakening and noticing the things that are around you that you look to make you feel a little bit better. And it kind of takes a couple of months maybe of them not being present for you to really want to immerse yourself in all of that. Yeah.
I guess building on that, it's great that you made a piece about your local park, kind of a love letter, as Adelaide said. I think there's something kind of powerful as a bit of archive of that period in our kind of collective recent experience that's kind of special. Not to mention the fantastic Rebecca Lazarou, what a legend. Check her out, Laz the plant scientist, very cool. But yeah, the fact that you sort of went from the macro to the micro in that film, I think is really helpful for us all, and, you know, kind of testament to where art can play a role in kind of communicating sort of the macro, the micro, what's under our feet on our doorstep. And I think in doing that, we're building hopefully stronger relationships to the contexts, the habitats in which we live, which is fundamental as we go, into a really rapidly changing environment with climate change. If we don't know how to read our local environment, then it's hard to really respond to the bigger global picture. So, thanks for making that piece.
I think those entry points are really important. And like you say, totally got to acknowledge Rebecca Lazarou and Andrea Koo that were part of the video. Yeah. But that narrowing of because I always think about what, there's all sorts of things that are problematic in terms of people finding entry points to nature, and that sounds kind of ridiculous, but we had those conversations as well around how it can feel kind of exclusive or infinite, and like how do you begin in that narrowed window, and or how do you give yourself, how do you make it okay to begin that journey? How do you reconcile that you don't begin necessarily from a standpoint of infinite knowledge? Because that's something I'm always wrestling with. You're like, kind of like, how is it that I've come to be talking here? When this feels like a relatively recent journey, but I think constantly trying to connect with people that don't feel like they already can connect, and actually acknowledging those barriers as valid. And like you say, that I mean, there were so many quotes that you, all three of you, said that I was kind of like, that really sums up something really important around this. Like, how do you value something unless you get to know it and notice? How do you, if you don't know what it is, how do you notice that it's there? So I'm constantly trying to think of just ways to enable that in a not from a point of experience and knowledge, but like, let's go on this journey together. Like, how do you start by valuing a dandelion and kind of reconnecting with all these things? To become liberated by all of it.
I think that's where, as Rebecca mentioned, finding your local herbalist or kind of knowledgeable forager in your kind of context is really helpful, because there's something very powerful when you pick a plant and you encourage somebody to ingest it, and that kind of process of crossing the threshold from picking to consumption is quite a revelation. Suddenly it synthesizes inside your body and you're given a story.
Quite special.
Yeah, and then that storytelling and that kind of guiding is a huge way to get people to see themselves as part of the landscape, not sort of on top of, or and particularly in cities where everyone on this call lives. They're habitats. They're not something separate to the natural world. So that's where starting with the cracks, starting with the small tenacious medicinal edible plants is a good way to start opening up that lens. And as you say, Frances, the entry points. But storytelling, I mean, we love narratives. We love building stories. And that's why, the work you've produced is important.
I think the medicinal side as well is an entry point as well, isn't it? I mean, I'd like to ask you as well, because we were talking about the urban landscape and urban plants. I had this conversation last time we were talking to Rebecca about how it feels like there's particular plants that are beneficial to us, that follow us about, once you realize the ones that are have these medicinal benefits to people, they really are those little weeds that follow us about. That it's just, I don't know what your kind of thought is on that, but it is when we disrupt the ground and become disruptive, these little things kind of seem to pop up and tap us on the shoulder, like plantain and cleavers and nettles and all of those. Like, I don't know what your theory is on that, Michael.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think, I don't know how to answer that, other than we keep on replicating habitats. Like we, came out of caves and now we build cities that are like caves. rats and pigeons follow us in those habitats, and so do plants like ribwort plantain, which like disturb soil. They're like pigs and humans because we disrupt the soil, but yet they're our allies in terms of antimicrobial and cell sort of support. But I guess the thing I'm kind of responding to of what you've just said is seasonality of plants. That point in between now and the end of winter, the nettles are starting to gather their strength, and I've been picking some this morning actually, and that's there to kind of get us through the next few months, and soon you see the little cleavers starting to pop up tiny, and then they'll shoot. Come late January, early February, that's when our kind of immune systems and our kind of lymphatic systems will really need to be cleaned out. So it's kind of not just sort of noticing the allies that follow the habitats we create, it's also knowing what hints and clues they're giving us to our own kind of seasonal needs. And I've noticed it does something to my head every year when I start noticing the budding or kind of a little seedling pop up of a particular plant, and it kind of reminds me of actually how things are always getting ready for the next season, and it kind of helps you not dwell too long on how February is really depressing and dark, because you actually see these things taking shape, which is once again really helpful, getting out of that human kind of time scale of January, February, March, April, May, and into a different seasonal time frame, which is a paradigm I think is good for us. But I guess I'm kind of interested in the role of, local communities in terms of identifying what's around them and advocating for their protection, and the idea of beauty. What's beauty? Often unmanicured growth is considered to be quite ugly and unsightly in this culture anyway. And I guess once again, the beauty of your park is actually looking into the sort of the messy cracks, the kind of things that are growing up between the grass. So yeah, kind of curious around your park and your work, how you kind of advocate for these spaces to be kept.
Yeah, it's so I've been trying to think about like what ways to do that, like yeah, and that, like, just sorry, jumping back on what you were just saying as well, like I was speaking to some researchers in Salford University, and they were talking about how there'd been studies into the sort of psychological anxiety reducing benefits of looking at these manicured landscapes, or something that is like more natural. I say that word because whatever. Yeah. And that there is a clear correlation between looking at the unmanicured being more likely to lower your anxiety. So this us in control, like, and the word of like gardening, and who has a garden, who can afford having a garden, is all of these things feel like they just push people away, when if you value all of these things, that kind of, because there's been all sorts of initiatives around no mow in the northwest, like Wigan Borough Council have like stopped mowing the verges and things like that, so loads of stuff's kind of grown up. But sometimes it feels like there's everybody goes for the wildflower sow, but sometimes they will put harmful chemicals in to like speed up the process so that the wildflowers can come in. And it's just how we break down the perception that the cornflowers that are put in and the yarrow that's already there, like they have the same value. It's I think, yeah, I am interested in how we kind of shift that. And I made like a card game for a project that I'm working on in Stoke, where I kind of tried to do like a plant reading game. So it felt like it was a little bit like sort of like tarot, but I put in there all of the things that I've kind of been finding out about healing plants and kind of, things that I've been finding out just by spending time with them. And then I was matching people with an individual plant just to try and see if there even like a little beginning of a connection could be made that allows you to notice, and then maybe something kind of grows out of that. Because I do think it's important to maybe begin. I find it helpful to begin with the specifics. Yeah,
I guess that's an entry point that you were mentioning.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like the Phytology and the project that you like co-run, it does that really directly, doesn't it? Your garden or your medicinal bed is the opposite of what you'd find in a formal garden, isn't it? And
kind of when we were sort of devising the idea of the Phytology medicine garden, we wanted it to be sort of seen as a brownfield site, like any abandoned site in an urban context. And that sort of first reading was really important to us. But then, as you have said many times, the entry points were through, a few signs, not many, identifying particular plants, and then people who tend the garden who had the knowledge around what the plants are and how to use them. And sort of that transformative sort of moment where you've seen a brownfield site and then you realize everything in there has medicinal application, and it's actually grown and tended as a very focused, specific garden, not ornamental and active kind of habitat, a biodiverse kind of meadow culture. And for me, it was more about kind of celebrating the in-between spaces and challenging ideas of formal beauty, and creating a sort of a cultural space of storytelling, and particularly around the history of herbal medicine. As mentioned in your film, it's taken millennia to kind of learn how to use these plants, and it's through both human and non-human kind of experimentation, and we can't lose that. We can't let that fall out of our bloodstream. So that's where phytology, I think, plays an active role as a scruffy urban alternative to places like the Chelsea Physic Garden, where everything's kind of numbered and you can't touch it, and it costs a lot to get in there. And it's not, phytology doesn't see itself as a nostalgic or remarkable thing. It's something that we feel every neighborhood should not have necessarily the same kind of space, but they should have spaces that they can author their own kind of reading or kind of approaches to care for land.
Yeah.
Michael, maybe perhaps you could talk about how that extends to other projects that are coming out from the garden as well. Mobile Apothecary and Urban Mind.
Yeah, thanks, Adelaide. So the medicine garden was opened in 2014, and then in 2019 we decided to kind of up our sort of medicine production, and we made a lot of cough medicine for Calais, for Herbalists Without Borders. And then we realized that actually we should focus our kind of our work on the streets of London with sort of increasing inequalities and homelessness. So we developed the Mobile Apothecary, which is a collaboration with many sort of herbalists, artists, growers, where we make day-to-day medicines we might take for granted, like cough syrups or chest rubs, and very old recipes, and we distribute them in Bethnal Green, Dalston and Hackney for free for anyone really that wants to access that knowledge and the products. But it's also a way to then get people back into the garden and kind of see the city as an abundant, viable living system. And more recently, Urban Mind project, which I've been working on for the last few years with landscape architects Jane L. Gibbons and neuroscientist Andrea McKelly from King's College London, measuring the qualitative and quantitative benefits of being around biodiverse and socially inclusive spaces. A way to kind of change the conversation a little bit using sort of technology, I guess, to kind of measure the impact of these spaces that can be seen as opportunities for development for sort of capitalistic gain as opposed to kind of opportunities for creating diverse, healthy, resilient communities, both human and non-human.
Frances, I mean, in terms of the projects that you've been working on, you're currently on a residency and working on community projects as well?
Yeah, I've been working with the Turnip Gallery in Leigh for a number of years on lots of different projects, and we've developed a garden, Turnpike Centre Garden. The gallery is part of a complex which has the local library in it and the local one-stop shop. We had this notion around making a green space or a garden there. Leigh is as a town has suffered from industry dropping out at points, and although it's in like a really green area, like in the centre, we thought that it'd be nice to bring a calming, potentially like a calming, positive space that could be a catalyst for lots more activity. And we thought about putting it on the roof and all these sorts of things. And then we thought about utilising the infrastructure that was already in place. So there's loads of planters, that like big concrete planters that are attached to the building, that we were allowed to use by the council. And we've put in a set of beds that are like, there's a tea bed. So my idea was that people that work in the building could safely like pick plants and have a brew while they go in. Then there's like a bed that's aromatics, which is just for people to have an encounter with without even necessarily being active in that. So that I'm kind of trying to acknowledge how people interact with gardens, and whether, you know, whether you have to like step in and be active in there. And then there's a bed that's full of plants that are associated with lowering anxiety and calming. And then there's a medicinal bed and a dye and creative bed. So we've been able to put all of these plants in place. And then there's a program connected to it that's all to do with like making a gardening club that actually has people come in that are expert in all of these different areas, or people from the Wildlife Trust talking around how the benefits of making your own little green spaces. And so that is, I was just looking today about the permaculture principles, and that noticing the things on the periphery that you overlook, like the verges, the little planters that are all already in place, and how it's just sort of gentle things that can actually make a massive difference. I always, and part of that is to do with artists and ego, you know, like getting over that I made a new shouty thing, like and being able to actually work with a system that's already in place. But I think I've been really lucky within my own practice to be able to have these real life experiences that, you know, inform other things. And because I'm still getting to know all of these plants, like, and getting to know how to be with them, and trying to understand how to make that okay, and how like the potential awkwardness of all of that, I think is really important. So it all feels like a shared learning kind of experimentation thing with this goal of like ultimate goal of connecting people with plants. And I'm on a residency in Spode Rose Garden, which is a little place that was kind of reclaimed by Airspace Gallery in the centre of Stoke. And they just took a little slice of this garden that hadn't really had any care, and showed what the potential was. And then people came on board and have supported them with it. And it's now got this whole series of like activations that are going on, and it's it's a beautiful space in the centre of Stoke, and I've been able to put in a medicinal bed and been able to interact with the people down there. So there's all sorts of things like parallels around, you know, propagation and how these things can lead to other things, and you know, at the moment, like saving seeds, and how, you know, that the revelation of that the first time you do that and you think, wow, I can just package this up and send it off and it can happen somewhere else. It's all of that's really kind of, you know, magical. Yeah.
It's it kind of ties into what we were talking about this morning when we spoke on the phone. Recently I've just finished writing a paper with my collaborators on loneliness, and this is part of the research through Urban Mind, the Urban Mind app, and particularly during sort of the last 2 years where loneliness is just incredibly kind of sort of increased in its prevalence. 45% of the UK population have reported they're lonely, and 5% it's severe loneliness. And then you look at sort of mortality rates, like 6% of the population die because of air pollution, 23% from obesity, 37% from alcoholism, but there's 45% within the UK that die from loneliness. And spaces like what you're doing and narratives of building sort of quality urban space actually is one of the greatest ways of pushing back against the epidemic of loneliness. And it doesn't necessarily mean individuals have to directly interact, but when they see actions that are positive and restore their sense of value within a community, it does make people feel less lonely. And also when they start to understand the biodiverse layers of a city, what the trees are, and you know, being around birdsong, it's also through the Urban Mind app, we've been able to measure that has a kind of a demonstrable value in sort of reducing loneliness in urban habitats. And you know, 70% of the human population is going to be in cities by 2050. So we've got to get smart to this, and that's why actions like what you're talking about are one way of kind of pushing back on this kind of harrowing trend.
That you mentioned earlier on as well, like, and I know this is not this simple, but when you can see yourself as part of a wider community that's not just human, you know, you're talking about like, you know, being on the top of anything like that, and it's like your insignificance has a different, you know, it's different. It can be liberating. Yeah, and I think, like you said as well, that when I'm outside the front of the gardens with Kevin, the gardener that you know helps me with the project in Turnpike, or that is actually the caretaker for the plants there. People come up and share stories. People just kind of there's something about you know, like someone coming over and saying, oh, my mum's got one of those, a passion flower, and you know, and then telling me a story about how they've been feeling unwell and like not been able to sleep, and it's just funny that it's that plant that kind of connected us, you know, with its ability to kind of, you know, calm and aid sleep and things like that. And I'm not a medicinal herbalist, by the way. It's just kind of things that I'm finding along the way. But there's something about that there's people are comfortable, you know, like especially coming from the art world where, you know, we have these uncomfortable white boxes and objects that you can't kind of, you know, really wrestle with. There's a prior relationship and a prior understanding and ownership, which allows people the comfort to share and engage. And that's, you know, that was kind of mind-blowing for me, because it's a public square, everything kind of going on. There's no entry to it. There's no closing it. It is like, it's accessible all the time. And yeah, just initiating those conversations are really nice. And people saying, oh, is that nip bone you've got there? And then that you kind of like, oh, you're connecting to this, the folk history of these plants. And And I just wanted to step back as well to something you said about this knowledge, and it's actually really recent, the gap, isn't it? Or like, so it's funny to be passing this on not by word of mouth. There is a gap that we've got to compensate for. So all of these things that we're putting in place wouldn't normally be necessary, would they? It's really recent history that we've got this, you know, close down of all of that knowledge.
Yeah, we've got in the medicine garden right now, actually, there's a large billboard which Adelaide and her collaborator, Days Ataji, made a big statement in English and Sylheti saying we speak in tongues about the things we love. And it kind of makes me think of what you were just saying about the garden. You know, we all have different ways we can connect and communicate ideas and connect to each other through such spaces, which is why they're important. Gardens are political. A lot of people think they're really cute, but they're actually hotbeds of local dissent and political kind of, you know, sort of visioning, which is why this work is really important within public space. And kind of opening up the soil in cities on the high street is kind of, I think, a gallant act that we all need to do. More civil obedience on that front, I think. Because often these things...
Because there's that infrastructure in place, isn't there? Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of the time things are just done because that's how they're done. But actually when they're questioned and you've got great working templates as to alternatives, you know, then suddenly, maybe that's a good idea. But we speak in tongues about the things we love is what's important there.
I need to jump in because we're running out of time, but we have two questions that I've just seen that we've received. The first one is from Jackie. Thank you for really enriching talks. I wonder, in your experiences, how much do you find other stakeholders are coming on board with these perspectives and values, local authorities, policymakers, funders, etc., and what needs to happen to keep these sorts of spaces open and public and biodiverse? It doesn't seem to be directly made for any of you in particular. I don't know if you can answer that. Shall I repeat?
I fortunately often work through amazing people that act as communicators or advocates for my practice and actually are intermediaries with funders or local authorities. And I don't like, I think there's a resistance sometimes to change like that. We kind of intimated then about, say you decide to swap out your annuals for perennials with all of these benefits, and actually it would have absolutely no impact on labour and would make the labour way more fruitful with the watering vans and the, you know, the kind of maintenance that occurs. But I don't softly, gently, I'd imagine is what's kind of, which is, it's not okay. But I can't. I think lots of art funding at the moment is definitely wanting to be seen to be allied with things that are environmentally more positive. And I feel like the art world's terrible for thinking of things in terms of trends, and I've been kind of wrestling with this, that even if it's something, even if some of it sticks and things move on, like it's still a positive that it feels like there's a spotlight, you know. I mean, there's an urgency with all of this anyway, but I probably can't comment on trying to get councils on board because I'm not the person that does that, and there's lots of people that I know have kind of battled on my behalf to get that happen, but I get the sense that it's not always that easy.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Jackie. I think the main thing from sort of my response to it is pick who you collaborate with. Be wise to that. Don't collaborate with developers that want to use artists or creative people as a softening for a new development, because it'll hurt you, it'll hurt the community, and it's a public self-harm exercise. pick areas in the city that actually, you know, are close to your home and that you know, and you can activate in a way that's meaningful for that specific neighborhood. No need to replicate, but learn and connect with other green spaces, be it like a small cluster of pots on a street through to a more ambitious kind of nature reserve, or, you know, you name it. Play is important, beauty is important, scruffiness, complexity is important, biodiversity is important. And I think as Frances said, people are resistant to change. But I think, as she said, softly, softly, is a way to start opening the ground and kind of experimenting. No, you can't really fail. Growing things is really forgiving, because you can always try again next season. And always try to be original. But the main thing, I guess, for me is there's an artist called Katrin Bohm who talks a lot about this. And this is kind of sort of diverse economies. Try not to rely on one source of resource fueling what you do, because then that is almost like a monoculture, and that's not useful. It's good to look to systems like succession or biodiversity to kind of learn from in terms of our sort of very human systems. Look at who's doing great stuff locally, talk to them, learn from them, share resources, share seeds, contact Phytology, anyone like, you know, any organizations like that, and go, I want to do this. What are your tips? Reach out. You, one, build your network, and two, you'll build a great vocabulary around why you're doing it. And three, I guess the main thing is do it slowly, take time. You know, we're always told to rush, but actually it's kind of rebellious to do things incredibly slowly and enjoy the process.
Thank you, Michael, for that. And Frances, on that note, we'll need to end now, but thank you both very much.
Thank you.